Are we ready? Chapter 8. It starts off talking about for sale by owners and really the need for us as real estate agents, what we can provide for sale by owner. Now, you may have sold a house on your own as a for sale by owner, and that's great. It's not uncommon that somebody's getting into this business because they sold a house on their own and they enjoyed the process. The real applause goes to the fact that you're not the statistic, because 90% of for sale by owners will list with an agent. So you're one of the 10%ers that was able to get it sold. So one of the things that we provide, among many as an agent, is we can actually help a for sale by owner, or a seller in that case, get the right price for their house. We also have an understanding of how the paperwork comes together. We have the time to devote to all the aspects of the sale of their house, as opposed to the sellers who may work, both of them work a 8-to-5 job. We can prepare and help fix up their home, or show them ways to fix up their home for sale. We understand the market. We understand what makes a buyer just come out and say, wow, that's a great house. And we can aggressively sell it within the planned time that the seller has as well. In 2011, NAR reported that the typical home that was sold by owner sold for $150,000 versus the typical house that was sold by a realtor was $215,000. Those are pretty vague statistics. I don't know if I could make the assumption then that my house will sell that much more. But if you've ever heard of Dave Ramsey, he has a statistic that he shares. He actually promotes a real estate industry. He says that you'll make roughly 16% more if you list your house with an agent as opposed to try and sell it on your own. And I like that number for a couple of reasons. One, it does show that we can help you as a for sale by owner make more money. The other thing is that 16%, okay, the average commission around here is 6%. So after they pay the commission, they make 10% more on the sale of their house, if they want to look at it that way, if they go through us. And 9 out of 10 for sale by owners, like the statistic says, eventually go with an agent. In fact, 87% of the buyer pool is already working with an agent. And realtors, not that we have this anonymity, or this, not that we have these issues with for sale by owners and we can't stand them or we don't get along. It's just that we have enough houses on MLS right now to show our buyers. So we're not out actively showing for sale by owners because we have enough houses out there to show that are currently on the market. The contract difference between an independent contractor and a salesperson is on this next slide. An independent contractor, which is what most real estate agents are, or you yourselves will be when you get out there, you're going to work based on commission. You'll typically set your own hours. You'll pay all of your expenses. And the broker is not responsible for withholding certain things out of your income. Usually you just get whatever the commission works out to be, and that comes in one big fat check. But as an employee, or as the employer of an employee, you have to withhold Social Security, income tax, unemployment. You can set the hours for your employees that you'll be here from 8 to 5, and they simply receive a salary or an hourly wage. Using technology, there are different ways that we can use technology. Technology is changing and increasing in this industry. It wasn't much more than the late 90s that there were a good number of agents that didn't even carry cell phones. And now it's pretty hard to imagine how you would even do business. It's pretty hard for 15-year-olds to imagine how they would even live without a cell phone, let alone professionals. So there's cell phones, and then we look at the number of smartphones that are out there. In fact, that is rapidly becoming the number one way to browse the internet is via your phone. So there's a lot of technology out there. A great thing about our industry is that it's always worked to stay on the cutting edge. So there's a lot that you can do with a tablet, with a PC, and with a smartphone that you couldn't do 2 years ago, that you couldn't do 10 years ago. And then we also have things like social media, which we'll look more at when we get into how we can build our sphere of influence, how we can hone in and put our focus on our database and start drumming up business and succeeding in this career. Obtaining the listings. Listings, like we've mentioned already, belong to the company. That contract between the seller and the broker is what is the listing agreement. The agent does not own the listing agreement. It's owned by the broker. It's not a contract between them. Although the agent may feel the opposite. The agent feels like I'm the one doing all the work. I'm doing the open houses. I take all the offers. I negotiate. But when it comes down to it, it's between the broker and the seller, just like the buyer. It's between the buyer and the broker. The listing, just to talk about how that process goes, I would like to share with you the process that I use. It's a two-step process, and I've actually learned it from the person that was assigned to me when I got in the business. This was the system that she used. So she taught this to me, and it's worked out very well. Now, everybody has their own personality. Everybody has their own flair, and so you may develop something that you like that works better. And there's pros and cons to the way that I do it. I have a two-step listing process. In other words, I visit or see my sellers twice before I list. So the con, right off the bat, is that if I just did a one-step, I would have the listing that day. But because I have a couple days in between when I see the seller and I come back, there's a chance that they could have a change of heart, or they could change and decide to go with a different realtor, or what have you. So that's one of the cons. But my approach allows me, in my feeling, to give a more accurate market analysis. If I just went and visited the seller one time, I would have to basically tell them, without even looking at the house, this is how much I feel your house is worth. And every house, even though on the outside may look the same, once I get in, there could be some serious amenities that make it worth more, or some things that actually hurt the house's value. So my first step in this two-step process is I go out and visit the seller at their house. It takes maybe 10 minutes, 15 minutes. And what I do is get to know the seller, ask them a few short questions, and then I have them take me on a tour. I have them play realtor, and they take me on a tour of the house, show me every room. I don't bring my camera. I don't take my tape measure along. I simply take my notepad. I take notes as I go through and detail everything that's specific about that house. So when I go back to my office after I leave them, I can do a market analysis that is as accurate as I possibly can make it. And when I leave them some marketing materials. And that may be something you want to do. Not every realtor has marketing materials put together, but it's something that might, if you do put together, will give you an advantage. And so here's some ideas of some marketing materials that you can put together. Whether you go down to FedEx Kinko's and have them bind it for you, or you put it in a 3-ring binder that you purchase at Staples, or something in between, this is some things you can include in that packet. One thing is maybe the top 10 questions that a seller has. And if you Google these, or even YouTube them, you'll find some of these already on there, so you can cut and paste. So you don't have to sit down and think, oh, what's question number 7 going to be? A lot of that's already online for you. But the top 10 questions that a seller has, why would that be good to have? Because then a seller, if they feel like, oh, this is a stupid question, I don't want to embarrass myself, then they're reluctant to ask it, whereas if you have it there, they can read it. It also saves you time. If you have sellers that are more inclined to ask questions, then they can go to that sheet and get some of them answered. You might even put some of these on your website. You could go paperless. You could just send this to them in like a PDF file, right? And they can flip through it that way. So another thing you might have in there is at least one type of document that shows the dangers of overpricing your house. And use pictures. Don't just use an article that somebody wrote and put it on black and white, or put it in black and white. Use pictures. Use charts and graphs. Think of yourself. If you got something on white paper with black letters in like Times Roman font, which is like the most boring font known to man, and it was size 11 font, single spaced, are you going to sit there and read it? Probably not. But if you have a few sentences and then some charts, some color graphs, people are more likely to read it, right? So the dangers of overpricing, why would you want to do that? It's more for you, because you're trying to deflate the seller's balloon a little bit before you get there. Because you're going to find that a lot of sellers feel their house is worth more than what it really is. And that's just human nature. It's my house. The reason why it's worth more is because it's my house. Okay? Another thing you might want to include in there is if you go on to the National Association of Realtors website, they have a section in there that talks about cost versus value. And they do these reports on an annual basis. And you can print off the report for this area. They probably won't have 2013s out, but they might have 2012s done, or whatever year you're looking to put in there. And what you'll find with that is they'll break it down. They'll have the nation as a whole, the region that we're in, and they might even have this particular area, okay? And what it does show, again, this is kind of to help deflate the seller's balloon a little bit. It'll say if you put in a $16,000 kitchen improvement, you'll get back $9,000. If you put in a bonus room or a sunroom and it costs you $57,000, you'll get back $32,000. I'm just throwing out those numbers, but it shows sellers that if you put in this is what you'll get back, cost versus value. Because if I put in $10,000 worth of granite throughout my house, I'm not going to be able to add $10,000 to my purchase or my list price and expect my house to sell anytime soon. You just don't get back dollar for dollar. Unless there is an exception. You'll get back more than dollar for dollar if you buy a property that is undervalued. That's what investment people do, right? I buy a house for $52,000. I put $30,000 into it, so now it's $82,000, but I sell it for $150,000. I got back more than dollar for dollar. But the average house that's just occupied by the owner, not a bank repo or a flip, you don't get back dollar for dollar. Another thing that you would include in there is what type of marketing works. This is another statistic you can pull off of NAR. What type of marketing works? Where do the buyers come from? And it actually, if you go to the website, it has a list. It talks about classifieds. It talks about radio/TV or billboards or internet. What works? You're kind of helping the seller to set their expectations. In the marketing packet, you would also want to include what you do in your marketing efforts. What sets you apart? What's all the websites that you advertise on? How many open houses do you do? What do you bring to the table? You might have a short page that's your biography. Again, going back to the top 10 questions that a seller has, or the sheet that you'd make up on the dangers of overpricing. People don't want a lot to read. So if I'm going to do a biography about myself, I'm probably not going to have 13 paragraphs about from the day I was born until now. Okay? So here's an idea, because I think biographies are good. They have their place, okay, in this business. So you can use them wisely, or you can use them to your detriment. But if you're trying to create a biography about yourself, not write a biography, but try to create just a bio about you, take some time and just write out 20 words or phrases that you feel would best describe you. Okay? That's not going to be your bio. But what you're going to find is when you write out those 20, you're going to find that about half of them to 60 or 70% are kind of overlap. They're synonyms. They're similar. And so from there, you can extract the more dominant ones that seem to surface as you're writing about you, or maybe your spouse chimes in on this, and remind them that it has to be positive things, not negative things. You can create a few sentences based on that to describe you and what sets you apart. I'm not saying you can't include some background, but nobody needs to know that I grew up in a rural town and went to such and such school from grade 1 to 6, and then from 7 to 8 my parents moved me to this town. Not important. So those are some things that I would leave with my potential seller on that second visit, or that first visit. And then I'd go back to the office and I'd put together my market analysis, so I had all that information. When I was completed with that, I would have a time to meet back with them, and we'd go through my CMA. What goes in my CMA? What I'm looking for in my comparative market analysis, or my market analysis, is I'm looking for houses that are similar to my subject property. They need to be similar in age, style. So if I have a ranch, I want to find other ranch houses. Location, number of bedrooms, number of baths, the year built. I want to find homes that are as similar as possible. And then from there, I'm going to create my CMA. Now, I'm going to broaden this out. I'm not just going to look for houses that are sold. I recommend looking for houses that are active as well. In fact, when I narrow down my homes, my goal is to find 2 homes that are sold and 2 homes that are active, or even one that's sale pending. Sold is wonderful. You want sold comps because that is proof what a buyer will pay in this market. So if I'm looking for sold comps, I want to find something that's sold as recent as possible, right? But the reason why I include actives in there is because this is going to be my competition. And especially if I'm in a market that my prices are rapidly going up or rapidly going down, actives are going to be a good gauge to help me set that price. So I include both. Now, when you're working with your broker or the person that your broker assigns you to, they may have a different thought pattern, and that's perfectly fine. Although mine is right. No, I was joking. There's lots of different ways to approach this business. My main concern is that you keep yourself safe, okay, and out of trouble. I also have on here that you may want to physically tour. Now, it's always a great idea for you as the agent, if you have the time and the ability, to go inside and tour the houses that you're using as comps. Usually, you're busy enough where it's not going to be something you can do. But what I'm mainly implying with that phrase is that if I have a seller that I feel is going to be a tough cookie to convert or to believe that my numbers are right, and if I have a house that's one of my comps, and let's say it's vacant, for instance, that's the ones I usually like to pick because then I don't have to set up a time to go show it, it's vacant. So what I'll do is when I come back the second time and visit with the seller, I'll have them hop in my car and we'll go down the block and visit this house that's for sale, that's vacant. And I'll take them through it. Chances are they haven't been through it. And it helps me to convince them that this is why I have your house priced this way, or this is why I came up with these numbers. So, not required, just a thought. So when I come back on that second visit, I have with me the CMA, the market analysis that I go through with them. I also will give them a seller's net proceeds sheet, which will show them how much they'll net if they list it at this price. And I actually do more than one of those. Usually that first visit I try to find out where the sellers would like to list their house at. And sometimes they know and sometimes they don't. And so if they give me a number, I'll do a net sheet based on that number. Then I'll do a net sheet based on my number. And then I'll do a third net sheet based on the probable selling price. If houses in that neighborhood sell for about 95% of list price, then I'll do a sheet based on that. So they can see that, you know, this is where I think your house is and this is where I think, and if we sell it, this is where you'll probably come up at. I don't use the word if we sell it. It's when we sell it, because we're going to sell it. Yep. Listing contract and all other documents, because I'm expecting to list the house. Now, if I'm in a multiple situation where they're interviewing me and other agents, I still bring this because I'm expecting them to choose me, but I don't lay them out like I would in the normal scenario when it's just me and them. I wait for them to initiate that. A map of the comparables. That's one of the features on our MLS. When I have located and picked the 4 comps or 5 comps or 6 that I'm going to use, I can print them out in a map format and it will put little stick pins all over on the paper for me where these houses are at, so they can see in what proximity they are in relation to their house. I bring a tape measure so I can measure the rooms. Some agents, I have never met them, but I would assume, measure the outside of the house. That was my thought, that I'm always going to have to measure the outside of the house to get an accurate square footage. But here, we usually go onto the county website, and it tells us what the square footage is in the house, and those are the numbers that we typically use. So I measure the house, and I bring my camera so I can take pictures. And I'll tell you when I do that. I do that when the seller is filling out the property condition disclosure, because they have to do that themselves, right? We talked about that. We can help them if they have some questions, but it's their name that goes on it. It's their hands that are filling that out, and they're signing it. So while they're doing that, usually it gives me almost perfect amount of time to measure all the rooms and to take pictures. So I kind of kill 2 birds with 1 stone. So that's when I'll take pictures. Sometimes people have a busier life, I'll say, and so there may be some things that are scattered around. And so like if I'm going into the bathroom, I always get permission. But if their countertop is cluttered with a bunch of stuff, I'll take it off, take the picture, and then I'll put it back on in the place I found it. That way, when the buyers are looking at the pictures on MLS or on my website, it looks like it's nice and clean. They can see the house for what it really is. You would be shocked how many people make decisions based on those pictures, and they don't give the house a fair shot. And so I'm working to put what's in the best interest of my seller ahead of mine, so it might be inconvenient for me to basically clean their house or temporarily, but I want to sell their house, and I want them to get a fair shot on the market. And then lastly, I bring a gift. They get this whether or not they list with me, and you can do anything from, a candle to a book, whatever fits you and your personality. If you're, let's say you're the second week in October, you're on this second appointment, you can bring a pumpkin. So you can think a little bit outside the box. But I always brought a candle. In fact, I'd buy just a bunch of candles. And I actually got these woodwick candles. Anybody heard of woodwick candles? You can get them at Shields or other stores like that. But the thing I like about the woodwick candles is that it kind of works for both guys and gals because it has a great scent, which the women like, but the candle is wood, so it crackles like a fireplace, which is cool for guys. So at any rate, I would leave that gift with them. Lastly, before I leave this, I know that our cameras, or the phones on our cameras are like 8 megapixel or even higher. This is my opinion. So this is not from the Real Estate Commission. And again, I'd have this talk with your broker. But I think it's a little bit more professional if you use the actual camera than you just, the same phone you were texting your buddy on while you were talking to the sellers. Now you're using that to take pictures. I just think it adds to the or takes away from the professional side if you do that. That's me. Okay? It's my opinion. There's even realtors that are licensed home stagers, and home staging works. It definitely works. The sellers I was talking about, they weren't in a financial position to go down that road. So I temporarily cleaned for picture's sake, and then you can use things like the feedback you get from other agents, because if you know the house is dirty and has a scent to it, other agents are going to say that, and so I'd use that. I always was upfront with my seller and let them know, this could be an issue, and then I would let it be reinforced by the agent showing it. But ultimately, it's up to the seller. I have heard of agents that if it's not in the condition that they want it in, if it's not picked up, if the walls aren't a certain color, if it's not market ready, they're not taking the listing. So, and there's nothing wrong with that. Again, it's up to you. But the thing I always want you to keep in mind is that if there are issues that are very evident, like if the outside of the color is fluorescent, or the outside house color is fluorescent pink, and you get in the house and they have 15 birds in one room, the house isn't going to sell, probably, unless you have a person that has their sense of smell removed and also is blind. But what happens when that listing contract expires is that it's your fault that it didn't sell as the agent. It's not the seller's fault. And they don't just keep that to themselves. They tell all their friends what a horrible agent you are. So you need to protect your career and be upfront with them. I'm not saying you have to go to the extreme of saying I'm not going to take the listing, but if that's what you feel, then fine. But I think everybody out there, for the most part, is looking to you to help them, to give them advice. And if you did bring in a home stager, it's a third party that can be the bad guy too. So. Yep. It was like 1 out of 20 houses that I listed that I had to do that. So it's not, even the messier houses, they would still pick up if they knew I was coming to take pictures. So we have different types of listing contracts. If you remember back, we talked about the different types of buyer contracts in Chapter 7. And these listing contracts are going to be really pretty much the same. We might take out a few words or add some, but they're going to represent the same thing. So if we look at, let's say, these 4 houses, And this first one is an exclusive right to sell. The sole right to sell is given to one person, and that broker receives commission regardless. So I'll put in here like I did on earlier. We have the seller, and then we have you, and I'll put down here the co-op, so like another firm that brings in the buyer. So regardless of who brings in the buyer or who finds the buyer, you get paid. You get paid. The next one is exclusive agency. Again, one person has been given the exclusive right to sell, except in exclusive agency, the seller retains the right to sell and not pay a commission. So if the seller sells, they don't have to pay a commission. So here's our exclusive agency. And then finally, we have our open listing. What's that? Yep, if the seller sells, you don't get paid. You don't get any money if the seller sells. You only get money if you sell or if somebody brings in a buyer. So on an open listing, only the broker that secures the buyer is the one that gets paid. We talked about in Chapter 7 that we have this same scenario with the buyer. And in this state, we also call it non-exclusive representation. And that's where a buyer can work with a realtor from Century 21, a realtor from from Coldwell Banker, a realtor from ERA, and has contract with all three realtors, and whichever one finds them a house, that's the one that gets paid. Same concept with the seller. The seller works with Coldwell Banker, ERA, Century 21, Prudential, and all their signs are in the yard. Kind of looks a little messy like the picture I have, but that's what an open listing is. And whichever firm brings in the buyer, that's the firm that gets paid. The similarity between these three are the exclusive right to sell and exclusive agency. You have the exclusive right to list and sell this house, and you get paid if you bring in the buyer or if another firm brings in the buyer. The similarity between these two, between the open listing and exclusive agency, is that the seller retains the right to sell it and not pay commission. So if the seller in both of these cases procures a buyer, they don't have to pay out a commission. So that's the three agencies or listings that are similar to the three types of agency representations that we have for buyers. The next one we have is called a net listing. And this is where the seller receives a set amount or a net amount, and the broker gets anything over that amount that's agreed upon. There's a mathematical way to figure this out. It's in your book, and it's maybe a little different than how you're used to or how your mind would work to figure this out. And because your test is multiple choice, you're going to have the other answer in there that you would have came up with, and if it's not a certain way, you're going to get the wrong answer. Okay? So the way that I'm going to show you, there's more than one way to use this or to do this to get to the same answer that I'm going to give you, but there's also a different answer that you could get. It's just a few dollars off, but it's going to be a wrong answer. So in the example that we have here in our net listing, which are illegal in the state of South Dakota, by the way, the seller wants to net $150,000. And the question will be, your commission is 6%, how much will you list the house at? And this is not a time to get technical, because you can actually list it for whatever you want to list it at, because it's a net listing. But what they're asking you to do is that if you list it at this, and you take out your 6% commission, you should get this. So what's the variable? And so what we're looking for is what we should list it at. And what we should list it at is that whole number. It's the 100%. It's the complete number. And we're going to subtract out 7%, which is our commission. And we get 93%. When we take the $150,000 and we divide it by 93%, we get $161,300. So let's say the sellers wanted to net $100,000 and your commission is 6%. Okay? I want to figure out the whole, or take the 6%, subtract it from the whole, the 100% number. Gives me 94%. I divide the 100,000 by 94%, and I get what? $106,382. Okay? So over here, this is my test question here, and here's my answers. I have A, B, C, and D. So I have 111,000, 106,382, 106,000 even, and 99,500. When I first looked at this, if I'm just simply going to add my commission to 100% or $100,000, then that's actually $106,000, right? So I would have chose C. I'm only a few $100 off from B, but B is the right answer. Okay? That's the way that we're going to figure out these commissions on a net listing. Okay? You got to figure out the whole. The whole is this number here, the one we come up with. Subtract out our commission, whether it's 5, 6, 7, 8%, and then we'll divide it by that number, and we'll get our answer. And you can always... Yep, but you can't use your phone. That's the only requirement that... Well, yeah, you can use... We have calculators out there. You just can't use your phone because you can store stuff on your phone. So you could cheat. And you can't use a what is it? It's not a scientific calculator because it has the ability to store stuff on there. So a couple off-the-wall things. Doesn't really flow well with the slideshow, but it's in your book. The discussion on a flat fee listing and a discount type broker. We have had both forms, and we still have one form of that here in this town. There's national franchises that do this, as well as some local forms and firms. So a flat fee listing company will have more of a menu-driven service, and you'll pay a fee instead of a percent for your whatever services you choose to have them provide. Chances are, though, on a flat fee type listing, even though you're paying the listing company by a set fee, when it comes to you paying the company that brings in the buyer as a seller, you're still going to pay a 3% commission. So you'll end up paying less because you're just going to pay the listing company X amount of dollars, like $2,000 or $4,000, but the firm that brings in the buyer, you'll still pay them usually 3%. So you'll save yourself some money. They have their purpose, and it's not our job to persuade a consumer, or not persuade, but tell a consumer how bad another firm is. If that is the firm that works out the best for us, that's the one that we should be looking into. A discount broker is one where instead of charging the standard, or not standard, one that charges the average commission rate that most offices charge, which in this area, usually a lot of offices are about at 6%. That's one of the average commissions in this area. I don't want to say that's the standard commission because that would be violating the Sherman Antitrust Act, which we're going to look at later. So the average is 6%. If a firm charges 5% or 4%, and that's what they charge for every seller, they could be a discount broker. And there's nothing wrong with a discount broker. They just usually they have limited services that they provide. When you go to work for a more traditional firm, they consider themselves a full service brokerage where they give the whole kit and caboodle. Whereas the discount brokerage may offer limited services, but the seller isn't going to be charged the full 6% by using them. When it comes to our compensation, we can't have a set commission rate. It has to be negotiable, and the market should really dictate that commission rate. There are different markets out there. In our market, it's usually a 6%, where 3% goes to the agent that brings in the buyer, and 3% goes to the agent that represents the seller. There's other markets out there where they do 7%, and 4% goes to the listing agent, and 3% goes to the agent that brings in the buyer. I've even seen markets where it's a 6% commission, which is their average, but 3.5% goes to the listing agent, and 2.5% goes to the agent that brings in the buyer. So the market should dictate the commission. And that brings us to this Sherman Antitrust Law or the Sherman Antitrust Act. Or they could just leave off Sherman and call it antitrust laws. And these are designed to preserve that free enterprise of the open marketplace by making it illegal to have these private conspiracies, these behind the closed door meetings where two or more brokers agree that this is what we're going to set our commissions at. So some of those violations would be, like I said, two or more brokers getting together and setting a standard commission rate. It doesn't have to be all the brokers in town. It just has to be two or more. Or where you'll see two or more brokers getting together and agreeing to limit their areas of trade. In other words, they refuse to do business with another firm. Like let's say you have two full-service brokerage companies and they really don't like this discount broker or this discount brokerage firm because they're taking all their listings because they're offering to list the house for 4% instead of the 6% average for that city. So these two firms or these two brokers come together and they agree that nobody within our firms are going to show the listings that belong to this discount brokerage firm. That's also a violation of the Sherman Antitrust Act. It was meant to promote fair trade. And so that's a good two-word definition for Sherman Antitrust Act, which is at the top of that slide, which is fair trade. How do we get compensated? Well, if we bring in a ready, willing, and able buyer, we should be getting compensated. If we can prove our performance, when the sale is consummated, in other words, when the transaction closes, or some firms can charge a fee or do charge a fee to the seller if the seller terminates. That would have to be agreed upon, of course, by the seller, but that is a possibility.
Talking 6%. How'd that come about?
This process,
Yeah,
you mean instead of just...
Yeah.
Because what happens if I take the 106,382 and I subtract out 6%,
Right.
I get roughly 100,000.
Yeah.
So when I take my whole and take off the 6% that I have to pay out for commissions, the seller will net this. If I took 106,000, let's say,
Yeah.
and I subtracted out my 6%, I get 99,640. So they're going to be short.
$82.
Yep. So the seller's going to be short.
Yeah.
So that's why you have to come at it from this angle. So some different ways that that a listing is terminated. Again, when we talk about something being terminated, it's not always that negative connotation. We can just say that it's over. So we can have mutual consent. Listing contract always prevails, though, until the property is sold. But if we have a breach of contract, either by the seller or by the agent, then we can get out of it, either party that's injured. The injured party, though, can sue for damages, whether it's again, the agent or broker or the actual seller. Death of either party. Remember that for your national test, even though our state forms say that if there is a death, such as the seller, it'll pass on down to the heirs. The economic change. If the home prices plummet or our buyer pools just dry up, seller would be released of that listing contract. If the property is destroyed, now we don't have a house to market or sell, so we had the house burned down. Contract expires. That's one thing we do have with all of our listing contracts is written termination dates. We have to have it in there. It's not only state law, but we're also in, if you remember from chapter 7, we're in what kind of agency as real estate agents? Well, we had those 3 classifications of agency. They're kind of like steps, and I drew them out like steps. So we had special. We had special agent, which is what we are. And then we had a general agent. And then we had universal agent. So the last part of this is the Realtor trademark. This is part of the National Association of Realtors. This is a trademarked logo and the name. Once you go through this course, you take your exams that are required by the South Dakota Real Estate Commission, and you pass, you send all your information in. A few weeks later, you get your license. You are now a licensed real estate agent for the state of South Dakota. Or you can say licensee or broker associate. You're not a realtor, though. You have to join the National Association of Realtors in order to be called or use that name of a realtor. And when I was first in the business, it was my habit to call them a realtor, making it a 3-syllable word, realtor. But if you look on the screen at how it's spelled, it's a 2-syllable word, realtor or realtor. And I had a few more experienced agents. Their feathers got a little ruffled when I called it a realtor. And so I quickly learned to call our profession a realtor. That's the correct way to enunciate the word. There's not the real estate police going to arrest you if you don't call it the right name. But you might get some more experienced agents to jump your case once in a while. But that's the name, realtor or realtor.